I'm Martin from Metropolitan University in Prague, and this is Michaela from Charles University in Prague. In this presentation, we would like to provide an analytical introduction upon the ways of representation of transgender minority in new media, especially YouTube. As have been noted in early 90s, the internet and widespread of digital connection, the accessibility of cyberspace will lead to new forms of free speech, accumulation of knowledge, that it will bring us into the era of a new type of hominization, as Pierre Levy said, and cultivation of discourses, including those resolving around the theme of diversity. Well, these fantasies have been already proven wrong. Of course, minorities, racial, gender, political, can be and are heard of in cyberspace, but it doesn't necessarily mean that their speech is free, not determined by power structures and oppression. They are, in many cases, intertwined with mainstream logic of distribution of topics, agenda setting, and manufacturing of seemed consent. After all, the power struggle into which minorities are constantly driven to could seem hopeless. The power of minoritarian language cannot escape its tendencies to become strict, oppressive, and subjectivating, as it is the case with the mainstream or major language form of speech. This is also the case with the discursive object transgender. Like we said, we would like to provide analytical introduction upon the ways of representation of transgender minority in new media. It is not the question of what is right or what is wrong. We solely focus on media representation. We will trace two ways in which is this representation differentiated, and also both are function under the diverse modality of speech and subjectivation. At first, we will offer an analysis of self-representation selected transgender influencers who explicitly thematizes the topic of transgender minority. On the one hand, ContraPoints, and on the other hand, Blaire White. Blaire White situates herself on a more of a conservative or Republican viewpoint, which is undermined by her way of speaking and using certain phrases. On the other hand, ContraPoints is much more aggressive, narrow, but at the same time more open to take into consideration other points of view. Both ContraPoints and Blaire White represent the voices of the oppressed, but in a rather different manner. It's very interesting to observe dialogue between these two. In their content, strong refusal of media stereotypes about transgender are fought. When they are invited into debates, sometimes even when one of them hosts these debates, they become representatives for the whole transgender community, and they are pitted against each other, as if there should be zero debate among transgender people about the meaning of their identity. They are almost becoming speechless, in a sense of symbolic violence determined by non-discursive settings, and are put into a scene or stage when the whole YouTube session is a priori constructed as a white talk show, theater, where nothing relevant can be said. They are set in, or there is a role inscripted into their bodies that they should act obliged to the stereotypes they fight against. There is no discussion, only their becoming of stereotypical transgender person without their own voice.
Thank you for the introduction. As was already mentioned, we're gonna talk about two specific YouTubers. The first one is Blaire White. She has almost 1 million subscribers, and she's more on the conservative side, Republican side of the political spectrum. And ContraPoints, or Natalie, Wynn, as is her personal name, the ContraPoints is the name of the channel. She's usually included in the list of so-called LeftTube or BreadTube YouTubers with 1.27 million subscribers. So they are pretty big YouTubers, considering that they're mostly focused on the on transgender issues and issues connected to transgender issues. The debate we're going to specifically talk about is since 2017 on the White channel, and it's called Heated Debate with Genderqueer Feminist. At the time of recording, Wynn identified as genderqueer. Since then, she came out as transgender woman. White was already out as transgender woman back then, which is pretty important for her argumentation style. During the moderated debate, they mostly discussed what does it mean to be a transgender and who can quote-unquote be called transgender. Wynn stands for the trans-inclusive feminist perspective, differentiates between gender as a social construct and more of a psychological matter, and sex as based on biology. According to Wynn's view, sex can be changed just as well as gender, and she considers trans women as women. Because Wynn considers gender to be a social and psychological matter, she also says there's no need to experience gender dysphoria to transition and to be considered a transgender person, which is also important for her argumentation. In this matter, her argumentation is also based on ABBA's definition of transgender people. White says she doesn't fully differentiate between sex and gender, even though she says sex cannot be changed because we can't change biology. She repeatedly says she's biological male and she cannot change that, even though she underwent hormonal therapy and several surgeries. She also says that experiencing gender dysphoria is crucial to being transgender. Wynn and White are obviously on opposite sides of the opinion spectrum. Their argumentative styles are also quite different. White is mostly arguing from her own experience as a transgender person, frequently committing a typical argumentative fallacy from personal experience with anecdotal evidence. Wynn mostly uses arguments based on theoretical approaches to gender identity and definitions drawn from ABBA's documents. What's particularly interesting is not only the argumentative styles, but also the language used during the debate. Wynn is trying to be as inclusive in her language as possible with using as neutral vocabulary as possible. She often criticizes White for using harmful, exclusionary language typical for the trans-exclusionary feminist vocabulary, just as trans women's vagina being a wound, trans women imitating biological females. White defends herself with arguing that is just description of reality, which is pure disregard of how language can in fact be harmful. Trans people experience slurs and exclusionary language on a daily basis, and White's approach can be seen as a complete disregard of the linguistic harm experienced by them, as ContraPoints mentioned several times during the debate. Full-blown gatekeeping on who may or may not be considered transgender can be seen when they start discussing Riley Dennis, a fellow trans YouTuber. White refuses to refer to Dennis with she/her pronouns, as she is not, according to White, making an effort to be a transgender woman. White stresses here the importance of performativity when it comes to transgender identity. Wynn is trying to persuade White into being kinder and states arguments such as that gender is a psychological matter that can be expressed in various ways. White is not convinced. They end up moving to a different topic. We can see now that the debate is running in circles. Neither of the YouTubers is fully accepting of the opinions and arguments that the other person states. The discussion begins and ends in the same spot. This was all predetermined with the main question of the debate itself: who may be considered transgender? The question is so dividing, in a sense so limiting to the participants, they're basically just pitted against each other for the show, with no hope of reaching a consensus of some sort. The community ends up seeming awfully divided with close to zero contact points. Since the debate, Wynn and White haven't debated directly, as in this debate, even though they mention each other in their videos pretty frequently. White reacts to Wynn's content and opinions for example, the truth about Contra, and reacting to YouTubers who hate me. Reaction videos are frequent White's content. When it comes to transgender people, she criticizes their views on transgender identity and often calls them out on not really being transgender. Her view, biological essentialism and the need for gender dysphoria has remained unchanged. When you mention White's views directly in a video called Cringe, she criticizes her gatekeeping that she considers to be without merit and harmful. Indirectly, we can see her critique of White and other trans people with similar views, who could be called in the slang of the community true scum. in Wynn's character Tiffany Tumbles. In a video called Just Like the Character Herself, we can watch an acted out debate between a character very similar to White and a character resembling already mentioned Riley Dennis. This video was published approximately a year after the heated debate, and Wynn intended, according to her own words, to sympathize with opinions on both sides. The intent is visible primarily in behind the scenes of the debate, when Tiffany is falling apart because she doesn't pass as well as she would like, getting drunker and drunker until she faints. She's so frustrated with the fact she doesn't pass as the gender that her performativity isn't good enough to be considered fully female that she just gets so drunk she faints. That's when the video ends. Nobody wins the debate. Neither of the worldview conquers. Once again, even though we're talking about fully acted out stage debate, we can see the main problem present in similar transgender debates. The goal is entertainment, not reaching any sort of consensus, or defending the community, or something like that. Both ContraPoints and Blaire White represent the voices of the oppressed, but in a rather different manner. It's very interesting to observe the dialogue between these two, either direct or indirect. They both try to refute the stereotypes of trans people that are commonly seen in mainstream media, though their strategies couldn't be much more different. Blaire White offers a very strict set of characteristics which allow people to call themselves and to be considered transgender from the general public. ContraPoints is trying to show how complicated the identity issues actually are, expressing more nuance and less direct opinion. Both of them have very strong fan base, millions of views of their videos. They're under immense pressure to be good representatives of their minority, the paragons of transgender people. They're criticized for every mishap, from their own community just as well as from the general public. ContraPoints talks in length about this issue in her video on cancel culture, canceling. One misstep causes several months of cyberbullying. When it comes to White, she apologizes for her strict gatekeeping in her apology video to Riley Dennis, called I'm Sorry. She mentions here her own experience of transitioning under the strict public eye, experienced immense amounts of cyberbullying. Both of them are heavily criticized for not being either the well-known stereotypes, which they're trying to refute, or just not being flawless entertainers with morals aligned with what their community considers to be proper, appropriate, legit. In mainstream media, they're regularly becoming tokens for trans women during debates. For example, during a Vice debate which White attended, when she was literally labeled as Republican trans woman. ContraPoints, due to the amount of cyberbullying and canceling she's faced from both trans community, especially on Twitter, and general public, hasn't taken part in debates. She occasionally appears on podcasts where she's given more space to present her views. Otherwise, she just sticks to her own content and streams for her fan base. Thank you so much for your attention, and we're looking forward to your questions.